Before we get into it, get comfortable. Turn the lights down if you haven't already. Put your phone face down. This one is going to take a while, and it's going to earn every minute of that time because regular show is the kind of show that rewards the slow look, the kind of show where the longer you sit with it, the more it gives back. So settle in, and let's go through every theory, every reading, every whispered corner of the fandom that has built up around this show since it first aired in September 2010. The ones that are basically confirmed, the ones that live on fan wikis and old Reddit threads, and the ones that quietly explain why the show always felt heavier than a workplace comedy about a blue jay and a raccoon had any right to feel. There is a moment in the series finale where Pops floats upward into open space, and he smiles this small, private, almost relieved little smile right before everything ends. And if you have watched the full run of the show, if you have sat with these characters through 8 seasons and 260-something episodes, that smile is one of the most devastating things in the show's entire run. Not because it's dramatic, because it isn't. Because after everything, after all the waiting and the hiding and the centuries of other people's sacrifice, he just looks peaceful, like he finally understands something he has been on the edge of understanding his whole life. That moment, right there, is the thesis of everything we're going to talk about tonight. Drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is, where you are. I love knowing who's out there in the dark with me on these. The first and most persistent reading that attaches itself to regular show is the one that people tend to arrive at naturally, usually somewhere around the second or third season when the patterns start becoming hard to ignore. It's the theory that the park is not a normal place, that it is, in some fundamental sense, a threshold, a space that exists between things rather than as a thing itself. On its surface, the show is a workplace comedy. Mordecai and Rigby are 2 slackers in their early 20s, a blue jay and a raccoon, respectively, employed as groundskeepers at a public park run by a gumball machine named Benson. They do as little work as possible. Their errands escalate into cosmic confrontations. The universe gets saved, nothing gets learned, the loop resets. That's the premise. That's what the show looks like from 30,000 feet. The reading that has stuck to this show since almost the beginning is that the park is a kind of waiting room. Not heaven, not hell, not purgatory in any strict religious sense, but something more like a liminal holding place. A space designed for people who haven't finished becoming who they're supposed to be. A place outside of ordinary time where unresolved people stay until they resolve. You start looking at the cast through this frame, and everything shifts. Mordecai and Rigby are dead-end 20-somethings repeating the same week indefinitely, unable to leave, unable to grow, turning the same corners of the same park day after day. Benson is the only one who seems to sense that there should be a way out, which is why he's permanently furious, permanently threatening, permanently at the edge of something he can't name. Skips is a yeti who has worked there for centuries, moving in the same patterns, never aging, never leaving. Pops is something else entirely, and we'll get there. Muscle Man wears the same shirt every day. High Five Ghost is dead. He has been dead the entire run of the show. Nobody finds this notable. Nothing in the show states outright that the park is a liminal space. There's no single line that stamps it. But the way time moves through the show, or fails to move through it, the way characters die and return with no real consequence, the way the park seems to bend reality around whatever the current crisis demands, the way nobody measurably ages across 8 years of storytelling, all of it builds a picture that is genuinely hard to unsee once you've started seeing it. The argument that fans have been making since roughly 2013 is that Regular Show is not a workplace comedy. It's a comedy about people who don't yet know they're between lives. And the tragedy of it, the part that gets louder the further into the run you go, is that some of them figure it out. Some of them leave. Mordecai eventually leaves. Rigby eventually leaves. Margaret leaves. Muscle Man transitions. And some of them, Benson most conspicuously, seem forever stuck just at the edge of that understanding without ever quite reaching it. The park as threshold theory doesn't need the show to confirm it to function. It works as an interpretive lens, and it works because the show's structural logic supports it at almost every turn. Cosmic threats materialize and vanish. Death literally shows up on a motorcycle and has to be bargained with. A being who cannot die has been maintaining the property for 250 years. If this is just a regular park where regular things happen, the writers went to a lot of trouble to make it look like something else. Sitting directly underneath that theory, running through almost everything else in the show, is the Pops question. The question of what Pops actually is. For the first 6+ seasons, Pops is treated as essentially decorative. He's a sweet, faintly befuddled gentleman with an enormous lollipop-shaped head who lives in the mansion at the top of the park, has no visible responsibilities, talks in an old-fashioned cadence that doesn't quite fit the contemporary world, and responds to almost everything with delight or confusion. He is written as the park's warm heart, its emotional anchor, its comic relief, the person everyone is vaguely fond of in the way you're fond of something gentle and harmless. Then the show does something genuinely surprising. In Season 8, the final season, it reveals that Pops, whose real name is Mega Kranis, is not human at all. He is one half of a pair of cosmic beings born on a planet called Lollyland. His twin brother, Malum Kranis, known in the show as Anti-Pops and voiced by Robert Englund, is his exact opposite. Cruel, nihilistic, a being whose entire existence is oriented toward destruction. The two of them have been cycling through this fight for longer than the current universe has existed. Every time they clash at full power, reality resets. A new universe, a new Pops, a new Anti-Pops. The same fight, again. Forever or until one of them finds another way to end it. The show's canon explains that Pops was placed on Earth deliberately, hidden in plain sight, raised by the park's owner, Mr. Maillard, as an adopted son. The idea being that if Pops never remembered who he was, the fight couldn't begin. Every day he spent being sweet and confused at the park was another day the universe bought for itself. When you know this, the entire preceding run of the show recontextualizes. The question isn't why a lollipop-headed man lives in a mansion in the middle of a public park with no apparent function. The question is how long the staff of that park has been unknowingly shielding a cosmic being from an ancient reckoning. The fan reading that extends from this, which the show supports but never states outright, is that the park was built for exactly this purpose. Not landscaping, not recreation. The park is a sanctuary, a hiding place constructed by a man who knew what Pops was and loved him anyway, designed to keep the secret for as long as possible. Benson, the angry manager, skips the immortal groundskeeper, Mordecai and Rigby, the slackers who can't be fired, all of them pieces in an arrangement that looks like a workforce and functions as a shield. The conspiratorial extension of this, which is speculation and should be labeled as such, is that everyone on staff was selected specifically, not consciously, not with job listings and interviews, but selected by some quality in them, their obliviousness, their toughness, their willingness to absorb the impossible without it breaking them that made them precisely right for the work of keeping this place intact without knowing what the work really was. What makes this reading so durable is that it doesn't require anything impossible. The show just needs you to watch the first 7 seasons, knowing what you know at the end of the 8th. And when you do, Pops's kindness reads differently. His joy reads differently. Every moment of pure sweetness he brings to the show starts to feel like something preserved under glass, something the universe went to great lengths to protect. Because the moment it ended, everything was going to change. And it did. J. G. Quintel created the character of Pops not in the writer's room of Regular Show, but in a student short film made at CalArts in 2005 called The Naive Man from Lollyland. In that short, a sweet, round-headed man drifts through a strange world, getting into small disasters. The character's DNA is all there, the gentleness, the confusion, the charm. When Quintel later developed Regular Show, Pops migrated into the new show, and the world of Lollyland migrated with him, buried deep, waiting for the moment in the final season when it would resurface as the answer to the question the whole show had been asking. This is worth understanding because it confirms something fans have long suspected. The mythology of Pops wasn't invented for the finale. It was always there. Quintel built the show around a character he'd been developing since art school, and the show grew outward from the seed of that character's origin. When the finale finally visits Lollyland, the inhabitants they meet 3 strange beings called Frivola Cranus, Quadrivi Cranus, and a creature fans have named Weird Mushroom Guy are actually early design sketches of Pops himself, prototype versions of the character. The show, in its last hours, shows you where its heart came from. There's something almost unbearably tender about that, if you let it land. Now let's talk about Skips, because Skips is the character around whom almost every theory about the park's deeper nature eventually orbits. He is introduced as the handyman, the Yeti who skips everywhere instead of walking, who knows how to fix anything, who the others turn to when things go catastrophically wrong. He's treated as wise in that slightly mythological way. Animated shows sometimes treat their elder characters, the one who has seen it all, who speaks slowly and precisely, who doesn't waste motion. He wears only blue jeans. He has 5 fingers when every other character has 4. He has been at the park since before any of the other characters can remember. The reveal of how he became what he is arrives in the 5th season episode, Skip's Story, and it is one of the show's most genuinely devastating half hours. His real name is Walks. He was born somewhere in the 18th century. The show places elements of his backstory loosely in the early 1800s, and he was a young man with a bad temper who had been expelled from 3 schools for fighting. At a new school, he met a girl named Mona, or Desdemona, a warm and easygoing young woman who made him want to be better than he was. They fell in love. They used to skip together around the school's grounds. It was their thing. A small, specific, ridiculous, tender thing that 2 people do when they are happy and young and alive. Mona died, saving him from a cosmic bully named Clorgbane, a giant destructive being who attacked the school and whom Walks had to fight with a magical weapon called the Fists of Justice. A piece of the ceiling fell on her. She was gone before Walks could do anything about it. And years later, when the Guardians of Eternal Youth offered him immortality so he could fight Clorgbane every 157 years, when the bully returned, they told him he would need to take a new name. He thought of Mona, of skipping. He said the word. That was that. He has been skipping ever since. Every footfall is him refusing to walk again, because walking is what he was doing the day he lost her, and he cannot undo that, but he can refuse to keep doing it. The wiki confirms all of this. It is canon. It is also one of the quietest acts of sustained grief in any animated show of the period. What fans have built on top of it, and this part is interpretation, is the theory that Skips has been at the park long enough to understand what the park actually is. That his presence at the property isn't happenstance or loyalty. That the guardians of eternal youth didn't just make him immortal and send him off to wander. They gave him a post, and the post is the park. The reading goes like this. Skips has been the park's actual anchor for centuries. He's the reason cosmic threats get contained rather than spreading. He's the reason objects of dangerous power end up in Pops's house and stay there rather than falling into hands that would use them badly. He's the reason the park, despite being the apparent nexus of every supernatural catastrophe in its zip code, has never been permanently destroyed. He is not a groundskeeper. He is a steward, and everything else. Benson, Mordecai and Rigby, Muscle Man, High Five Ghost. Pops is what's grown up around him across 2.5 centuries of watching people come and go through the same door. The most unsettling version of this theory, the one that fans come back to most often, is that Skips has always known about Pops. He has known from the first day Pops arrived on the property exactly what the sweet man with the lollipop head actually was. And he kept the secret not because he was ordered to, but because he understood what the secret was protecting. He had watched enough universes of loss by that point to know that a few more decades of peace were worth having, even if they were borrowed. Nothing in the show confirms this. He never says it. He doesn't have a monologue about it. But the way the show shoots Skips watching Pops with this patient, fond, faintly weighted attention is the visual language of someone who knows more than the scene requires them to know. And once you start reading his silences as knowledge rather than stoicism, every scene he's in becomes slightly different. A separate thread runs through the show around the question of who Skips has been watching before this particular generation of park staff arrived. The fan theory, and this one is purely speculative, not supported by any production material or interview, goes that Skips has seen generations of people cycle through the park, that there have been previous versions of Mordecai and Rigby, previous Bensons, previous chaotic employees who caused disasters and saved the world and eventually left or were let go. That the park keeps producing the same type of person, the same kind of slacker friend duo with potential they don't know how to use, and that Skips has been watching the same play run with different actors for so long that he can predict the arc before it even begins. This theory is unprovable. The show doesn't comment on it, but it explains something real about the way Skips responds to Mordecai and Rigby's disasters, not with surprise, never quite with genuine alarm, but with the patience of someone who has done this enough times to know what it costs and how it resolves. He's not unflappable because he's serene. He's unflappable because he's been here before. Here is something that becomes true if you watch Skips carefully and then look at the guardians of eternal youth, the small group of small men with disproportionately large heads who granted him his immortality and who appear throughout the show as a kind of background cosmic institution. The guardians are ancient. The show treats them as a fixture. They are there for ceremonial events, for cosmic crises that exceed the staff's usual capacity, for moments when the show needs to signal that something deeply old is in the room. They are friendly, slightly absurd, clearly more powerful than they appear, and they obviously know significantly more than they share. The fan theory around the Guardians, which extends the Skips theory considerably, is that they represent a whole infrastructure of hidden cosmic maintenance that the show only ever glimpsed at the edges. That Skips is not an exception among their kind, but a representative. That there are others like him placed in other parks, other thresholds, other quiet places where reality gets thin enough to need someone watching, and that the whole business of regular show, the cosmic threats, the reality bending objects in the attic, the various warlords and death personifications and supernatural entities who use the park as a waypoint, is one small node in a much larger system of managed strangeness that has been running since before recorded history. The show invites this reading by treating the Guardians with the casual familiarity of people who are always a phone call away, who can be summoned, but who have their own concerns that exist far beyond the episode's plot. They are never just present for the convenience of the story. They always feel like they've arrived from somewhere with their own context. That's the behavior of a mythology that goes deeper than the show had time to show. Before we go any deeper into the cosmic architecture, there's something important to address about the origin of regular show itself, because the show's origin story is one of the most interesting pieces of fan-adjacent lore in the fandom, and it generated its own theory that has been circulating since the early seasons. J.G. Quintel made a student short film at CalArts in 2006 called 2 Inches the AM PM. It is 8 minutes long, it is rated TVMA, and it involves two gas station clerks working a night shift on Halloween who accidentally eat acid-laced candy and begin hallucinating. As the trip progresses, one of the clerks transforms in his hallucination into an anthropomorphic blue jay. The other transforms into a gumball machine. Their designs are immediately recognizable. This is where Mordecai comes from. This is where Benson comes from. The short is Clerks, filtered through CalArts animation and whatever Quintel was thinking about at 22. The fan theory that emerged from this and it spread through the fandom because it genuinely has some teeth is that regular show is the acid trip that never ended. That the park, the characters, the entire surreal reality of the show is the interior of a human mind that ate something it wasn't supposed to and never came back out the other side. By this reading, Mordecai is the hallucinated self of a very ordinary young man working a very ordinary job, and every monster they fight is a paranoid projection, and the cosmic stakes are the stakes of a frightened mind in an altered state trying to process something it can't quite access. The show does not confirm this. Quintel has not endorsed it. It's worth flagging as speculation, but the DNA of the theory is real. It comes from an actual piece of the show's documented production history. The short exists. Quintel made it. The characters came from it. And there is something genuinely strange about the fact that regular show's two most central characters were born from a hallucination in a short film before the show ever existed. Even setting aside the theory that origin story tells you something about the register the show was always operating in. Quintel was making something that felt like the inside of a particular kind of young adult experience, the late night job, the boredom, the strange hours, the surreal quality of time when you have nothing anchoring you to a conventional schedule. Regular show is that same energy shifted into a weekday morning cartoon. It carries the DNA of something that originally didn't look like it could be made for children, even after it was made for children. Now, let's come at Benson for a moment, because Benson's arc, the arc of the permanently furious gumball machine who manages the park and threatens to fire Mordecai and Rigby roughly once per episode, is one of the most interesting undercurrents in the show's mythology, and fans have built a reading of it that is genuinely more interesting than the show ever made explicit. The surface story is clear. Benson is a middle manager. He is stressed. His two worst employees are also the show's protagonists. Every episode ends with some fresh disaster he has to account for and cannot explain to anyone above him. He yells. He threatens. He cycles back to the beginning of the same argument. He is the comedic straight man of the show's main dynamic, and he is written to be sympathetic and infuriating in roughly equal measure. The fan reading, which started appearing around the third season and never really went away, is that Benson is haunted, not by something supernatural, by something closer to dread. The argument goes like this. Of everyone at the park, Benson is the one who most senses that something is fundamentally wrong with the place. He can't name it. He never gets the language for it. But the show keeps giving him this specific look in the middle of yelling, in the middle of threatening to fire someone, where the anger drops away for just a moment, and what's underneath it is not irritation, but something that looks more like fear. The fear of someone who has begun to suspect that the loop he's living in is not normal, and that there is no exit from it he knows how to find. He has tried to quit. There are storylines in which Benson quits the park and goes to pursue something else, and something always brings him back. He can't leave the way Mordecai and Rigby eventually leave. His growth arc is smaller, more internal, more quietly painful. The thing he eventually achieves is not escape, but acceptance. That this is his life, and he is going to try to build something dignified inside it. The fan theory's cruelest implication is that Benson is the most tragic figure in the show because he is the closest to understanding the truth about the park and the furthest from being able to do anything with that understanding. He can feel the shape of the secret. He just doesn't have the access. What the wiki doesn't document, but what the show builds slowly enough that you feel it even if you can't articulate it, is the particular exhaustion of a person who is responsible for the surface of something and can tell there's pressure building underneath, but is never allowed to see what's generating it. Every cosmic crisis comes home to Benson as a budget problem, a staffing nightmare, a report he has to file with Mr. Maillard that conveniently omits the part where his employees accidentally opened a portal to another dimension. He carries the weight of the park's secret nature entirely in the form of paperwork. That is its own kind of tragedy. High Five Ghost is worth pausing on because the show treats one of its most cosmologically significant facts as essentially a running joke. High Five Ghost is dead. He has been dead the entire run of the show. He is a ghost. This is his name. He is called High Five Ghost. And nobody at the park, not Benson, not Skips, not anyone who has spent years working alongside him, ever raises this as something worth addressing. He floats. He has a high five hand where his face should be. He has a shadow, which real ghosts presumably should not have, though the show never comments on this. He lives a full, present, embodied life. He has a best friend in Muscle Man. He has a wife in the finale. He has a small home. He becomes a DJ after leaving the park, despite the fact that he has no body. The fan argument around High Five Ghost is that his presence at the park is the most concrete evidence available. That the park is not a place with normal rules about what state of being you have to be in to show up for work. He is dead. He is also employed. Nobody finds either of these facts notable. And the reading that follows is that his presence there is the show's quiet signal to anyone paying close enough attention. If you can accept that one of the main characters is dead and nobody treats it as unusual, you have already accepted that the park is not the kind of place you can leave by walking out. High Five Ghost in this framework is the park's most honest resident. He is already past the line that everyone else is being slowly walked toward. He has no pretense about his in-between state. He just lives in it with warmth and friendship and genuine engagement, and the show treats his life as entirely real despite its impossible condition, which is the show's gentlest possible argument that the in-between isn't the end, that whatever state you're in, you can still show up, you can still have a best friend, you can still make a home. The darker version of this theory speculation clearly is that High Five Ghost remembers exactly how he died and chooses not to discuss it, because the answer would break something in the spell the rest of the cast is operating under. He is the most settled of all of them, the most content. And the argument fans make is that being dead in the world of regular show might genuinely be easier than being alive in it, because you have already resolved the question that everyone else is still circling. Muscle Man, whose real name is Mitch Sorenstein, is built around one of the show's most consistent themes: the gap between the person you perform and the person you actually are. He is short. He is round. He calls himself Muscle Man, insists he's the toughest presence in any room, and wears his identity like a suit of armor he's been building since childhood. His father, Big Mitch, a figure the show treats with genuine reverence, died before the main timeline of the series, and Muscle Man structures a significant portion of his personality around that loss. The legend of Muscle Dad is larger than the man. The show makes this clear, but Muscle Man holds the legend like a weight he can use to prop himself up. The fan theory around Muscle Man is that he is the show's thesis statement about identity. Not just character identity, but the construction of a self that exists for other people. He is a small man who has spent his entire life insisting he is a large man, a tough man, a man to be reckoned with. And the show, with a gentleness that is genuinely rare for how it treats this particular kind of character, eventually gets him to put that armor down, not dramatically, not in a single cathartic moment, incrementally, episode by episode, in the small spaces between the catchphrases. He cries, he mourns, he loves his girlfriend Starla with a completeness that has nothing to do with toughness. He has a relationship with High Five Ghost that is one of the show's deepest emotional through lines: two men, one dead, who found each other and stayed found. By the time of the finale's 25-year time skip, Muscle Man is a father with more children than seems strictly reasonable and a look of settled happiness that is nothing like the performance of the early seasons. He made it out by becoming more genuinely himself than the version he was trying to sell. The extension fans build from this, which is interpretation rather than canon, is that Muscle Man, more than anyone else at the park, was always carrying a contradiction loud enough to hear. And the show's argument, carried quietly across all 8 seasons, is that the characters who perform the loudest often feel the truth of their situation most acutely. He just didn't have the language for it until he learned to mourn openly. The death of Muscle Dad is treated as one of the show's most genuinely painful moments, and the reading is that it needed to land that hard because losing the legend forced Muscle Man to figure out who he was without it. There is an object in the attic of the house where Mordecai and Rigby live that the show treats with the same reverence it eventually reserves for the cosmic mythology of pops and anti-pops. It's introduced in the very first episode. It's called the keyboard or the power. The show uses both names. It is an old, slightly ugly electric keyboard that Mordecai and Rigby find in the attic and discover can, under the right conditions, bend reality. They use it to skip work. They use it to pull pranks. It saves the world once. Then the show slowly moves it to the background, treating it as a fixture rather than a plot device, something that lives in the house the way old things live in houses present, occasionally noticed, never fully explained. The gap between what the show tells you about the keyboard and the space the show leaves open around it is where one of the most persistent fan theories lives. The argument is that the keyboard is not a piece of musical equipment that happens to have magical properties. It's a deliberately placed artifact, something much older than the park, left in a specific location by someone who knew what it was and wanted it to be found by the right people at the right time. The fact that it ends up in the attic of the house where the park's most chaos-prone employees live is, in this reading, not an accident, but an arrangement. Some fans push this further, arguing that the keyboard is connected to the cosmic conflict between pops and anti-pops, that it is a kind of anchor or stabilizer, something designed to orient the park toward its protective function when the time came. The show doesn't confirm this. The production material doesn't confirm this. But the way the show treats the keyboard when it reappears, with a reverential slowness, with a weight that exceeds what the episode requires, supports the reading that it understands itself as something more than a punchline. The smallest and most devastating version of this theory is that the keyboard was always meant for pops, that its reality-bending properties are compatible with his nature in ways no one ever had the chance to test, and that the most important artifact in the show spent its time being used to cheat at work by two guys who found it in a box while looking for something else. That's regular show in a sentence, honestly. Let's talk about Mordecai's love life. Because the fan theory around Mordecai's romantic arc is one of the show's most interesting structural arguments, and it goes considerably further than the surface story of a bird who keeps fumbling things with two women he cares about. On the surface, Mordecai spends several seasons trying to get together with Margaret, a robin who works at the coffee shop near the park. She is grounded, ambitious, clearly on a life trajectory that extends beyond the park's gravity. They get together eventually. It doesn't last. Margaret leaves for journalism school. Mordecai is devastated. He meets CJ Cloudy J, a cloud being voiced by Linda Cardellini at a New Year's Eve party, and they start something intense and volatile. CJ can literally turn into a thunderstorm when she's upset. The metaphor is not subtle. Their relationship is a weather event. It ends badly, partly because Mordecai keeps colliding with Margaret in ways that reopen things before they've had time to close. By the end of the show, he ends up with neither of them. He moves to New York, pursues painting seriously for the first time, gets successful, and meets a woman named Steph at an art gallery, a bat who is also an artist. They marry. They have 3 children. The wiki documents her. The writers, in a Reddit AMA, confirmed that her name had never been officially decided during production, and head writer Matt Price gave her the name Steph on the spot because JG, Quintel loves the Goonies, and a character from that film is named Steph. The fan reading around the Steph ending is one of the most divided in the fandom. There are fans who felt genuinely cheated they had invested in the Margaret arc, or the CJ arc, or both, and the show's answer was to make both investments irrelevant by introducing a character in the finale's closing montage who had never been seen before. There is a version of this reaction that is just frustration, which is valid, but there's a more generous reading that has stuck, and it's the one that holds together with the rest of the show's themes. The argument is that Steph is the point, that the writers, after years of watching Mordecai's indecision make things worse for everyone, were making a deliberate argument about how romantic life actually unfolds for most people in their 20s and 30s. Nobody ends up with the person from the coffee shop. Nobody ends up with the weather cloud girl from the most exciting season of their life. They end up with someone they couldn't have written into the script, someone who arrives after the person has stopped chasing the idea of a particular love and started being available for an actual one. J.G. Quintel confirmed in an interview with Animation Magazine that the Margaret and CJ stories felt complete on their own terms, that the arc wasn't about Mordecai choosing the right woman. It was about a young man learning from his mistakes and becoming someone who could move on. Steph exists in the finale, not as a consolation prize, but as the proof that the lesson was learned. She is the person he found after he stopped looking for a version of himself that someone else could validate. The conspiratorial extension of this, which is really just a thematic reading, is that CJ being made of clouds was the show's gentle flag that some of the love a young man feels in his mid-20s is for a person who doesn't entirely exist outside his own emotional weather. That the relationship was real and that it mattered and that it couldn't last, not because either of them was broken, but because they were both operating at a frequency that required constant turbulence to feel alive. And Mordecai, eventually, needed to live somewhere quieter than that. Heads Up Matt Price confirmed in that same AMA that Mordecai and CJ never reconciled after their breakup. Word of God on that one. They parted, and they stayed parted, which makes her absence from the finale feel like more than a logistics decision. It feels like an honest ending to something that ended honestly. Let's come back to Mr. Maillard, because he is one of the most under-examined characters in the run, and the theories around him matured into something close to canon by the time the finale aired. He is introduced as the park's owner, an older, powerful, somewhat severe man who appears occasionally to audit the park's finances, review its operations, and make it clear that he expects results that the staff consistently fails to deliver. He has almost no warmth in his business dealings. He fires people in tone even when he doesn't fire them in fact. He is the kind of boss who makes Benson's perpetual anxiety feel proportionate to the actual threat. And then you see him with Pops. With Pops, he is a different person. The severity goes somewhere. He looks at Pops with a tenderness that doesn't fit anywhere else in his personality. He is patient when Pops doesn't understand something. He is gentle in the small ways you're gentle with someone you love more than your capacity to express it. He is a man performing toughness for everyone else and failing to perform it entirely in the presence of the one person he raised. The show's canon reveal confirms what this relationship means. Mr. Maillard knew what Pops was. He knew from the beginning. He took in a cosmic being, an entity born to fight a war that destroys and recreates the universe, and raised him as a son. He built a park around him. He constructed an entire professional infrastructure and dedicated decades of his life to keeping the secret that gave his son more time to be just a person, unaware of what he was carrying. The fan reading extends this into something genuinely sorrowful. Mr. Maillard spent his entire adult life raising a child he knew was going to leave in the most permanent way imaginable. He knew what Pops was. He knew what was eventually coming. And every board game, every silly afternoon, every moment of Pops being delighted by some small ordinary thing, he was watching the clock without telling anyone the clock was running. His cruelty toward the staff, the snap judgments, the dismissiveness, the budget pressure is the brittle exterior of a man who cannot afford to let anyone see that he is terrified. His softness around Pops is the one place that armor has a gap in it. By the time of the finale's epilogue, Mr. Maillard has died. It's disclosed in passing. The park reunion happens without him, 25 years later. which means he died knowing how it ended, knowing his son sacrificed himself, knowing the universe survived because of it. The show gives him no scene for that. He just quietly isn't there anymore. That's a choice. The writers made it deliberately. And the reading is that some grief is too large to dramatize, and the only honest thing to do with it is leave the space where the person used to be. The space arc, the final season, is a conspiracy of its own kind, and it requires a slightly different treatment because the theories around it involve not just the show's content, but its production history. Regular Show spent its first 7 seasons as a workplace comedy that occasionally went cosmic. Season 8 is a continuous serial space odyssey that occasionally remembers it used to be about a park. The shift is real. The tone difference is real. And the question fans have debated since 2016 is how much of that shift was creative and how much was necessity. What Quintel confirmed in interviews. During Season 7, Cartoon Network signaled that the pickup for Season 8 would be for a smaller order than previous seasons. Quintel had always told the network to give him advance warning if they were thinking about ending the show, so he could end it properly. That conversation happened. Season 8 was planned from the start as the final season. The writers knew they were working toward a defined endpoint and built accordingly. The space arc, in Quintel's own words, was something the writers had wanted to do for years and kept deciding wasn't the right time. The concept of Lollyland Pop's home planet had been floating around the writers' room since the early seasons and never found its moment. The cosmic war between Pops and Anti-Pops was always the logical endpoint of the show's mythology, but it needed the right container, and a compressed final season with an announcement of finite runtime was that container. What fans have argued, and this is interpretive rather than documented, is that the space arc compresses what might have been several seasons of storytelling into one accelerated arc, that the show's mythology was deep enough to have sustained another 2 or 3 seasons of cosmic escalation if the timeline had been different, that the emotional beats of the final season hit as hard as they do partly because the writers knew they had one shot at each of them and invested fully. There is no evidence of conflict between Quintel and the network over the ending. Quintel has said repeatedly that the show went out on his terms, that he had the lead time he needed, and that he felt the 8 seasons were the right amount. Rigby voice actor William Salyers said in a quoted statement that Quintel simply felt, after 6 years of the show, that he had told the story he wanted to tell, that he didn't want to stay in one creative place too long. The ending came because the creator was ready for it, not because anyone ran out of time. What the space arc gives the show that nothing before it managed is permission to be openly emotional. The earlier seasons kept the earnestness under a layer of comedy and absurdist chaos. The final season earns the right to cry. Pop says goodbye to his friends, and the score swells, and nobody is pretending anymore that this is a show about lazy groundskeepers. It was always about something else. The space arc is when it finally admits what. Let's sit with the finale's actual ending for a while, because it's the part of the show that generated the most theory and still does. The final confrontation is between Pops and Anti-Pops, and it goes wrong in the way these things always go. They fight. The universe begins to destabilize. The fourth wall breaks in a sequence where Pops is literally thrown through a pencil-drawn restaurant from Quintel's 2005 short film, and Mordecai and Rigby briefly exist as a post-it note test animation and a storyboard panel respectively. Reality is coming apart at its seams. Pops stops fighting. He looks at Anti-Pops, his twin, his opposite, the half of himself that chose cruelty, and he smiles the same smile he used to give to everyone at the park when they needed it, and he grabs him. He holds him. He drags both of them toward the nearest star, and then there is light, and then there isn't anything. Anti-Pops, voiced by Robert Englund, the actual Freddy Krueger, is destroyed. Pops is destroyed. The cycle ends. A new universe begins. And this time Mordecai and Rigby are both there to remember the old one, because they had the presence of mind to commission Blu-ray discs of their memories before the fight started, which is the most regular show solution to the end of existence imaginable. The fan theory that refuses to die and it lives in comments sections across multiple platforms is that Pops didn't actually die. The argument draws on the show's own mythology. He is a cosmic being. Cosmic beings in regular show don't simply end. Every time Pops and Anti-Pops have clashed in previous cycles, the universe resets and both are reborn. The theory holds that the embrace inside the star is not a death, but a transformation, that by accepting rather than defeating his twin, Pops resolved the cycle in a way that allows both of them to become something new. The smile, in this reading, is not resignation, it is knowledge. He knows he's going somewhere, not nowhere. The show doesn't confirm this. The finale's final image, a post-credits scene where Pops, in what is framed as the afterlife, is watching a VHS tape labeled Regular Show on a screen suggests a kind of ongoing existence, though whether that's heaven or a cosmic in-between or something else isn't specified. He ejects the tape when it ends and says, in his characteristic voice, "Jolly good show." The credits roll. It is worth noting that the new series, Regular Show, The Lost Tapes, which premiered in 2025, uses this afterlife sequence as its framing device. Pops in the afterlife discovers that his memory tapes contain lost adventures from his time at the park. The revival is structured as those adventures. So in the ongoing mythology, Pops is somewhere, watching, and the show is being told to him, which is either a lovely meta-joke about the nature of narrative, or is the show's final, gentle confirmation that nothing that really matters actually ends. Depending on how you want to hold it, let's talk about Rigby properly, because his arc is the one that ends furthest from where it started, and that distance is the most honest thing the show does. Rigby in the early seasons is nearly indefensible. He is lazy, in a way that creates real harm. He lies. He manipulates. He cheats at everything. He sabotaged Mordecai's college application. This is revealed in the 2015 film Regular Show, the movie forging a rejection letter so Mordecai would stay with him instead of going on to something better. This is not a small thing. This is a young man so afraid of being left behind that he destroyed his best friend's opportunity and then lived with the weight of that secret for years while pretending it hadn't happened. When the truth comes out, Mordecai is rightfully furious. Their friendship fractures. It heals, but it takes time, and it takes Rigby actually owning it. The show is very clear about why Rigby became this person. His younger brother Don is taller, more successful, better liked, and somehow, despite being younger by 2 years, treated by everyone as though he's the older sibling, simply because he grew up more visibly. Rigby spent his formative years invisible, next to someone who wasn't even trying to outshine him, just existing more completely. His slacking, his refusal to try, his endless avoidance of anything that might result in failure. It's all the behavior of someone who decided long ago that if he doesn't compete, he can't lose. What happens across the show's final seasons is that Rigby, in small steps, learns to compete anyway. He goes back to high school at 23 to finish his diploma. This is treated by the show with the seriousness it deserves. It's not played for laughs well. There are laughs. There are always laughs. But beneath them, there is a real reckoning with shame. The show understands that the reason people avoid finishing things they should have finished is almost never laziness alone. It's usually the specific embarrassment of being old enough to know you should have done it differently, combined with the fear that doing it now will only confirm that you were always the person you were trying not to be. Rigby finishes. He graduates. He kisses Eileen for the first time immediately after, which is probably the show's most earned romantic moment. In the finale's time skip, he and Eileen have kids. The earlier scenes of Rigby playing video games all day shift to scenes of him playing video games with his daughters. The same person, in a different context, having found the one thing that could anchor him, someone who loved him as he was and made him want to do better anyway. The fan reading around this arc, which is less theory than close observation, is that Rigby's growth is the most convincing character development in the show because it doesn't sanitize him. He doesn't become a different person. He becomes the person he always was, minus the self-protective sabotage. He still slacks. He still causes problems. He just also, eventually, shows up. Eileen is worth her own section because she is one of the best written characters in the show, and the show is conspicuously not aggressive about advertising that fact. She is introduced as a side character, Margaret's friend and co-worker, a bespectacled mole who develops a crush on Rigby that the show plays for comedy in its early seasons. She is smaller than most of the cast. She is quieter. She is bookish and earnest, in a register the show could have treated as a joke, and mostly doesn't. The thing about Eileen is that she is the only character in the main cast who says what she means from the beginning. She tells Rigby she likes him before he is remotely ready to deal with it. She tells him when she's hurt. She tells him when she's happy. There is never a storyline where Eileen has to be talked into honesty or learns a lesson about communication. She has always already known how to do it. The show built its most emotionally functional character and then used her almost entirely in service of other people's emotional dysfunction for the first half of the run. The fan reading is that Eileen is the show's structural conscience, that every time the show wants to demonstrate what emotional maturity actually looks like, it gives the scene to Eileen. She is the measuring stick against which Mordecai's fumbling and Rigby's avoidance and Muscleman's performance are silently being assessed throughout the run, not harshly, not competitively, but accurately. The extension of this, which is more interpretation than theory, is that the show is quietly making an argument about which of its characters is most prepared for the life the finale shows them all eventually living. And the answer has been Eileen since the beginning. She doesn't have an arc in the traditional sense. She doesn't need one. What she has is consistency, and the show treats consistency, in the end, as the harder achievement. She and Rigby work because she is the version of steady that he needed to orient himself around, not to fix him, not to be responsible for his growth. She just made it possible for him to want to grow by being present and honest and not going anywhere. Death, in regular show, is a British biker. He has a leather jacket and a motorcycle and a formal title and occasionally shows up to collect someone whose time has run out. He is treated with a mixture of dread and casual familiarity that is specific to this show. He is not the enemy. He is more like an acquaintance with unusual professional responsibilities. The theory around death, and this one is largely atmospheric, is that his recurring appearances are the show's most direct evidence of how the park's relationship to mortality differs from the normal worlds. In the real world, you don't negotiate with death over a dodgeball tournament. You don't win someone's life back in a game of table tennis. But in the park's reality, you can. Death shows up, someone argues with him, terms are set, and whoever wins the contest gets to keep the person in question for a while longer. This happens multiple times across the show's run. It becomes, if not routine, at least familiar enough that the characters know the general shape of what they're dealing with. The reading is that this negotiability of death is the clearest sign that the park operates under different metaphysical rules than the surrounding world. Death himself seems to understand this and operates accordingly. He is not a predator. He is a bureaucrat. He has rules he has to follow, but the rules have exceptions, and the park is apparently an environment where exceptions get requested regularly enough that he's developed something like a relationship with the staff. The show also reveals, in a detail that the fandom clearly loves, that Death has a wife and a son. He has a family. He goes home. He worries about ordinary things. The cosmic personification of the end of all life is, in his downtime, a middle-aged man with domestic concerns. The fan argument around this is that it explains why Death is willing to be reasonable with the park's staff in ways he presumably isn't with everyone. He understands what people will do for the ones they love. He has his own version of that. You can reason with a being who has loved people. The theory around the show's 1980s obsession is one of the most interesting cultural readings in the fandom, and it goes somewhere more uncomfortable than simple nostalgia. Regular Show is saturated with the 1980s. The music, the video games, the arcade cabinets, the fashion, the action film references, the synthesizer soundtracks playing underneath crisis moments. The aesthetic is so thorough that it stopped looking like influence and started looking like argument sometime around season 2. The show doesn't just contain 1980s references. It insists on them with a frequency and a specificity that suggests something more than affection for a decade the writers grew up with. The fan reading is that the 1980s in Regular Show are not nostalgia, they are a haunting. The argument goes that the park exists at a cultural frequency where the artifacts of the decade, the keyboard that bends reality, the arcade game that opens a portal, the high score that summons a being who has been dead for years, are not memories, but active forces. The past, in the park's reality, has actual grip on the present. Nostalgia in this universe is not warm and harmless. It is something that can reach out and grab you. The Garrett Bobby Ferguson episodes are the clearest expression of this. Garrett Bobby Ferguson is a disembodied floating head, a former world record holder on an arcade cabinet who lost his record to Mordecai and Rigby in season 2 and spent the rest of his appearances trying to take it back. He dies. He returns as a ghost. He comes back again. He cannot let go. The show treats him as both funny and genuinely pathetic, a man who let a video game record define his entire identity, and then spent eternity trying to reclaim something that has been irrelevant for decades. The reading is that Garrett Bobby Ferguson is what Mordecai and Rigby could become if they stayed in the park too long, too attached to the version of themselves that was good at the things they were good at as kids. He is the show's recurring warning about what happens when you choose the high score of your youth over the life that's available to you now. Every time Mordecai and Rigby defeat him, the show is asking them, and by extension the audience, whether they're willing to grow past what they were once best at. There's a conspiracy in the fandom smaller than the cosmic ones, but genuinely interesting about the voice cast of the show, specifically about Sam Marin, who voices Pops, Benson, and Muscle Man. Three of the show's main cast. Three characters who function in completely different emotional registers. Three performances so distinct that most viewers watching the show probably don't consciously register that they're listening to the same person. The fan argument is that this is structurally meaningful, that Pops, Benson, and Muscle Man are in some sense three versions of the same underlying emotional experience, the soft, the furious, and the performative, and that the decision to give all three of them the same voice is the writers using their cast to say something the script doesn't say directly. Something about the park being a place where the same person keeps being remade, where the same core of experience keeps cycling through different character shapes without ever quite resolving. This is interpretation, not fact. Sam Marin has spoken about the joy of playing such wildly different characters. Practical reasons explain the voice casting as much as thematic ones. But the effect on screen is real. When Pops is tender and Benson is furious, and Muscle Man is performing toughness, and you know on some level that they all come from the same throat, something in the show's world clicks into place that you can't quite articulate. Three modes of being in an impossible place. Three ways of surviving it. Mark Hamill voices Skips, which the fandom never gets tired of noting. The man who played Luke Skywalker and voiced the Joker made himself entirely unrecognizable in the service of a slow, gruff, immortal Yeti who skips everywhere and carries 200 years of quiet grief. It's one of the more remarkable performances in animated television, and the show trusts it completely. Let's talk about the finale's ending, the 25-year time skip, as its own subject, because what the show chose to show and what it chose not to show is as much a theory as anything in the fandom. The skip sequence plays to David Bowie's Heroes, which is perfect, which was also a tribute to Bowie, who had died approximately a year before the finale aired. The sequence shows Mordecai becoming a successful painter and marrying Steph, Rigby marrying Eileen, having two daughters, teaching one of them to play video games, Muscle Man having an indeterminate but large number of children, High Five Ghost becoming a DJ and marrying his wife, Benson continuing to run the park with new employees, Skips still among them because of course Skips is still there, a statue of Pops in the center of the park, which is the show's clearest possible statement about what he meant, Mr. Maillard's absence, which we've already noted. What the show doesn't show, what Rigby does professionally, what CJ is doing, whether Margaret married, what happened to Thomas. 100 small characters who populated the show across its run and who presumably have ongoing lives somewhere. The fan argument is that those absences are as meaningful as what's present. The show chose to tell us only as much as we needed to feel the warmth of the ending without it becoming a census. It wanted the emotional architecture of the finale to be, these people survived. They are okay. They carry their losses. They kept going. Everything else, the careers, the status updates, the accounting of every storyline would have made the ending smaller rather than larger. The conspiratorial version of this is that the show was also being honest about how life actually goes after the central chapter ends. You don't get a complete report on everyone who mattered to you. You get glimpses. You see someone at a reunion and you're happy, they look good, and you don't know the whole story of how they got there. And that's fine. The finale gives the audience the version of checking in with old friends that feels true to how that actually works. The 25-year mark is deliberate. That's not a 5-year reunion or a decade anniversary. That's enough time for the characters to have fully become whoever they were becoming. Mordecai has grown chest hair. His kids are teenagers. Rigby's daughters could babysit. The park staff that Benson manages looks nothing like the original. 25 years is the show's way of saying they made it all the way. They didn't just survive the immediate aftermath of Pop's death. They built lives, whole lives, the kind you can look back on from somewhere. The pairing structure of the show is something fans have mapped carefully, and it leads somewhere philosophically interesting if you follow it far enough. Mordecai and Rigby, Pops and Anti-Pops, Skips and Mona, Walks and Desdemona, Before Everything, Margaret and CJ, Muscleman and Starla, High Five Ghost and his wife, Death and his wife, Mr. Maillard and Pops, his son who wasn't his son. The show keeps building its emotional stakes around pairs. Not because the characters couldn't function alone, but because the show's underlying argument about growth seems to be that you can't finish it alone. Every important development in the show, every moment where someone becomes more fully themselves, involves another person. The pairs are not romantic relationships exclusively. Mordecai and Rigby's friendship is the central pair of the show, and it is framed with the weight and attentiveness the show usually reserves for love stories. The cosmic version of this pairing structure is Pops and Anti-Pops, two halves of a single cosmic source, split into opposing forces, cycling through conflict. The fan theory around Anti-Pops specifically, which goes beyond the show's canon framing of them as simply oppositional twins, is that Anti-Pops is not a separate being. He is the part of Pops that Pops refused to be. Every act of kindness Pops chose over cruelty. Every moment he retreated into sweetness instead of facing the full scope of what he was. The energy he declined had to go somewhere, and it went there. By this reading, Anti-Pops is the accumulated weight of a cosmic being's refusal of his own darkness. He is not an enemy. He is an obligation, and the only way to resolve him is not to defeat him, but to accept him, to finally embrace what you've been refusing for so long that it took on a life of its own. The star embrace at the end of the finale in this reading is not a death. It is a reunification. Pops finally becoming whole at the cost that wholeness required. This theory has psychological and theological resonance simultaneously. It echoes ideas about the shadow self, the parts of a person that get externalized when they're not integrated. It echoes the structure of certain redemption narratives, where the only way to end a cycle of opposition is to stop treating the opposite as other. The show doesn't use any of this language. It stages the moment as an act of love in a star, but the bones of the interpretation are there in the structure, and fans have been reading them since the finale aired. The broader question the fandom has built the most around, underneath all of these individual theories, is this: what is Regular Show actually about? The most durable answer, and the one that appears in some form in almost every serious, long-form fan reading of the show, is that Regular Show is about being in your 20s. More specifically, it's about the specific paralysis of being in your 20s at the tail end of a cultural moment that told you things would be a certain shape and then presented you with a world that had a completely different shape. Mordecai and Rigby can't afford their own apartments. They live in housing provided by their employer. They earn, by one episode's calculation, roughly $100 a month less than minimum wage by any American standard. They have no clear career trajectories. They spend enormous amounts of time and energy on things that don't matter: video game, high scores, eating challenges, proving pointless arguments, because these are the domains in which effort still produces legible results. The cosmic threats they face are scaled exactly proportional to the emotional stakes they can't bring themselves to face directly. The giant monster is the conversation you've been avoiding. The dimensional portal is the decision you've been putting off. The world-ending villain is the feeling you couldn't name. This reading doesn't require any hidden mythology. It doesn't need the park to be purgatory or Skips to be a secret guardian. It just requires watching the show and noticing that the metaphysical emergencies map with suspicious precision onto the emotional situations the characters are failing to handle. Mordecai can't tell Margaret how he feels, and something terrible shows up outside. Rigby won't take responsibility for a mistake, and the consequences take on a physical form. The universe of the show enforces emotional accountability in the only way 20-something men are likely to pay attention to, by making the alternative survival threatening. The writers were making a show for an audience that was watching it at midnight in their apartments. They were making a show for people who had not quite become adults yet and were not entirely sure they wanted to. And they were doing it in a format, a workplace comedy with supernatural disruptions that gave them just enough protective distance from the truth to let the truth land anyway. The final reading worth dwelling on is the one that ties all of these together. The one that is less theory than description of what the show was doing with itself the whole time. Regular Show is a show about what it costs to grow up and what you carry out the other side of it. It is about the friends you make in the years when you don't have anything, and how those friendships become the infrastructure of everything that follows. It's about the patience of people who love you while you're still figuring out how to deserve it. It's about the fact that most people don't save the universe. They go back to school. They finish what they started. They have kids. They show up to things, and the show, in giving its characters a cosmic mythology while being absolutely clear that the ordinary life they eventually build is the actual point, makes an argument that ordinary life is worth saving. Pops died so that 2 slacker birds and a raccoon could finish growing up. The show knows exactly how large that story is. It spent 8 seasons making sure you'd feel it when it arrived. The finale ends with the group together, 25 years on, looking at a statue of the person who made their futures possible. Mordecai and Rigby go to find the old video games in the shed. They do the thing they used to do when they were young. They laugh at it, and the park is still there. Skips is still there. The afternoons are still soft. Not everything gets answered. Not every theory gets confirmed. The park might be a threshold, or it might just be a park. Skips might know everything, or he might just be very patient. The keyboard might have been meant for Pops, or it might have just been forgotten in an attic. These readings coexist without canceling each other. The show holds them all with the lightness of something that knows it doesn't need to resolve every question to be exactly what it is. If any of this landed for you tonight, if any of these theories shifted something in how you hold the show, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already on it. We do these deep dives regularly, and the next one is already in the works. If this video helped you settle somewhere softer than where you started it, then it did its job. The park is still there whenever you want to go back. The staff will be in the house. The cart will be ready in the morning. And somewhere in a mansion at the top of the hill, a sweet man with a lollipop-shaped head is watching a tape of his life and being completely at peace with how it went. Jolly good show. Sleep well. There's a secondary mythology embedded in the show's recurring game structure that is one of the most elegant pieces of world-building Regular Show ever did. And the fact that it was built mostly through repetition and pattern rather than explicit statement is part of what makes it so easy to miss on a first watch. Almost every conflict in the show resolves through a game, a board game, a video game tournament, a race, an eating challenge, an arm wrestling match, a dodgeball tournament. The characters don't just happen to play games during their crises. The crises are resolved by the outcome of the game, as though the universe requires a formal contest before it will agree to settle something. Death himself operates this way. You don't overpower Death in regular show. You beat him at something. You beat him at basketball. You beat him at table tennis. You beat him at arm wrestling. And when you win, he honors the result, because apparently the cosmic order he represents requires that results be honored. The fan reading is that the universe of regular show runs on contest mechanics. It is not, at its deepest level, a world ordered by force or morality or even consequence. It is a world ordered by games. If you can win the right game, you can change what happens. If you can finish the right eating challenge, you get a hat that might cost someone their life to choose incorrectly, and there's a knight at the end who will check that you got it right, and a skeleton in the corner of skeletons who didn't. If you can beat the world's oldest record on an arcade cabinet, you can put a grudge to rest. If you can knock Antipops off a platform before he knocks you off, the universe survives another cycle. By this reading, the show is not just a comedy with games in it. It is a cosmology in which games are the language reality speaks. A game is a contract. A contract requires two parties, and the universe of regular show always shows up as the other party, willing to be bound by the result, as long as the game is played honestly and to completion. This makes the excellent episode which won the show its Emmy for Outstanding Short Format Animated Program in 2012. The purest expression of this cosmology in a single narrative. Rigby wants a trucker hat that says "I'm excellent" on it. To get it, you have to finish a 12-egg omelet with chili, cheese, 2 biscuits, and a fruit bowl within 1 hour at a restaurant that J.G. Quintel based on a real eating challenge at a place called Broken Yoke Cafe in San Diego. Rigby attempts it and immediately goes into a coma because he is allergic to eggs, which he either didn't know or chose not to consider. Mordecai, in the hospital room, promises to win the hat for him, and the show treats this promise with the gravity of a sacred oath. The training montage that follows, set to Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero, is genuinely moving, which is the most absurd thing to say about a man training to eat an omelet on behalf of his friend who is in a coma because he wanted a hat. And yet the show earns it, because the show understands that the hat is not the point. The point is what it means that Mordecai would eat 12 eggs and spend a week in a vision quest and face a knight in a cave who guards the hats to win something for someone who isn't even conscious enough to know it's happening. The universe required a game. Mordecai showed up for it. That is the whole story of the friendship at the center of regular show, compressed into 11 minutes. The excellent knight who appears at the end of the challenge to give Mordecai his choice of hat has a skeleton beside him, a man named Jonathan Kimball, who worked at the park before the show's main timeline began, who figured out how to finish the challenge, who went to claim his hat, and who chose wrong. He chose a crown instead of a net trucker hat. The knight told him his choice was incorrect, and that was the end of Jonathan Kimball. His notebook, which documented everything he had learned about how to complete the challenge, was still in his old locker at the park. Skips knew about it. Skips saved it. The notebook that solves the problem was in the building the whole time, maintained by the person who keeps everything maintained. That detail, the notebook in the locker, preserved by the one immortal on staff, is so casually delivered that it's easy to miss what it implies. Skips knew Jonathan Kimball. Jonathan Kimball tried to win the hat, made a wrong choice in a mystical cave, and died there. Skips kept his notebook. The show gives you this information in passing, while Benson apologizes for being callous and Mordecai starts training. But if you hold it up, Skips has outlived at least one other person who got drawn into the park's metaphysical machinery, and he kept the artifact that could help the next person who got drawn in the same way, because of course he did. He knew there would be a next person. There is always a next person. Let's talk about the coffee shop, because it gets treated as a location, and it is actually an argument. The coffee shop near the park, the one Margaret works at in the early seasons, the one Eileen also works at, is where Mordecai and Rigby go when they want to not be at the park. It is their escape. It is the place they go to sit in a booth and eat muffins and not deal with whatever they should be dealing with at work. It is, functionally, the park's mirror image, a place of routine that they use to avoid the other place of routine. The fan reading around the coffee shop is that it is a confessional booth that nobody is confessing in. Mordecai goes there because he loves Margaret. He goes there specifically because he loves Margaret and cannot say so. He has been going there for seasons, buying coffee, ordering food, sitting in her orbit, and each visit is the closest thing to an admission of feeling he is capable of making without actually making the admission. The coffee shop is the geography of almost honesty, the place where the thing that needs to be said is never quite said. What follows from this is the observation that the show spends an enormous amount of time in a location whose primary dramatic function is to stage avoidance. The park is where cosmic things happen because the characters are avoiding something. The coffee shop is where they go to avoid the park's avoidance. It is a second-order escape, and nothing important ever happens there until someone decides to make it happen. Until Mordecai finally says something directly, or Margaret finally leaves, or Eileen finally starts becoming the center of the story rather than its support structure. The cynical reading of the coffee shop is that it is where young men in the show go to spend time near women they like without risking anything. The warmer reading is that it is the show's portrait of how much of life is spent in the places you've made habitual, because the habitual feels safe, even when the safe has stopped being good for you. The coffee shop is not a bad place. It is just a place Mordecai treated as a destination when it was always a waypoint. Somewhere in the architecture of the show, there is a recurring structure that fans have noted for years, and which constitutes maybe the least dramatic but most emotionally true theory the fandom has produced. The theory about the kitchen. The house Mordecai and Rigby share, the old two-story house on the park's grounds, has been the set for hundreds of scenes across the show's run. The living room, where the couch and the television live. The bedrooms. The attic, where the keyboard was found and where various other cosmic objects have surfaced over the years. The basement, which has its own history of dangers. And the kitchen, the small, slightly chaotic kitchen with the fridge that contains things that should not exist, and the cabinets full of the residue of past disasters, and the table where they eat things that are mostly junk and occasionally actual meals. The kitchen is the most honest space in the show. The rest of the house is set dressing aesthetically interesting, plot relevant, occasionally the site of something cosmic. But the kitchen is where they live. It is where important conversations happen because nobody's standing at attention in a kitchen. You're just there, getting food, half paying attention. And things that are hard to say in other contexts become possible because neither person is making eye contact with the other over something that means anything. The excellent eating challenge starts in the kitchen. Decisions about dangerous errands are made in the kitchen. Benson shows up in the kitchen sometimes. Skips is occasionally in the kitchen. The kitchen is the park's real common room, the place where the show's actual community is maintained not through cosmic events, but through the repetitive, mundane, irreplaceable act of sharing meals. The fan reading is that every time the show wants to show you who these people actually are to each other, it puts them in the kitchen, not in the middle of a fight with something apocalyptic, at the table with leftovers, bickering about nothing. This is the texture the show was building toward the whole time. The cosmic stakes were the frame. The kitchen table was the painting. One of the most honest structural conspiracies in the regular show fandom, and this one is more about storytelling than mythology, concerns the show's final season and the care with which it treated time. Quintel confirmed in interviews that Season 8 was planned as the final season from roughly the middle of Season 7. The dome that appears at the end of Season 7, sitting over the park for most of the final season's second act, was the first hint. The space arc was constructed deliberately around a defined endpoint, and the writers, knowing they had a finite number of episodes remaining, made choices about what to spend those episodes on. What they chose to spend them on is notable. They spent a lot of it on Pops being afraid, on the crew trying to help him not be afraid, on small moments, a party in space, Benson baking a cake that's shaped like Pops's bloodied face because he thought it was funny, the group sitting together in the dark between missions, telling each other what they like about each other. The show, in its final stretch, keeps finding excuses to slow down, to let characters talk to each other without a monster outside. The cosmic urgency is real, but the writers keep choosing to pause it in favor of the kitchen table moments, the small domestic honesty of people who love each other and don't know how much time they have left. The fan theory here, which is less a theory than a quiet observation, is that the writers were doing what the show's characters do. They were choosing the ordinary afternoon over the escalating crisis. They had spent 7 seasons showing that the ordinary afternoon was always where the show's heart lived. And in the final season, knowing the ending was coming, they came back to that again and again. Every moment the crew spends doing nothing in particular in the park dome, somewhere in space, having no idea if they're going to make it home, is the show saying, "This is the good part, right here. Not the fight. This. Pops dies. The universe survives. The park comes home. And the people in it go on to have ordinary lives that are full of ordinary afternoons," which is exactly what the show said it was about in the first place. The final image of the original series, Pops in the Afterlife, watching his life play back on a VHS tape labeled Regular Show, ejecting it when it ends, and saying, "Jolly good show," is doing more work than it appears. There are at least 3 things happening simultaneously in that image. First, it is a quiet confirmation that Pops survived in some form. He is somewhere, watching, existing. The show chose not to describe the afterlife in any detail. It shows you a screen and a couch and warmth and nothing else, but it chose to show you something, which means the choice was not to end with pure absence. Second, it is a meta statement about the show itself. Pops has been watching Regular Show. The tape is labeled Regular Show. He ejects it, evaluates it, and gives his verdict. Jolly good show. The audience of the show is watching Pops watch the show. JG. Quintel, who voiced Mordecai, who literally is in the tape, made Pops say that the show he was in was good. There is a circular quality to this that is either deeply pretentious or extremely funny, depending on your angle, and Regular Show was always a show that held both of those simultaneously. Third, and this is the reading, fans come back to the image, is the show telling the audience that someone was watching all along. that the events of the series were not just observed by the characters in them, but by someone with a different perspective, someone who could see the whole arc and name it properly. Pops watched from somewhere that allowed that kind of watching. And what he said at the end was that it was good. Not that it was perfect, not that it was easy, not that he would have done it differently, just that it was good. That's a generous thing for a show to say about itself in its final seconds. It earned the right to say it. If you've made it this far, thank you. Genuinely. These are long, and you stayed with it. And that means you love this show in the way that it deserves to be loved, slowly, attentively, willing to sit in the dark and follow it somewhere. If this video was good company tonight, leave a like. It helps more than you might think. And it tells me that this kind of slow, long-form coverage is what you want to find on this channel. Subscribe if you haven't. Regular Showed covers Adventure Time deep dives in exactly this style. And there is always more material, more theories, more late-night walks through shows that deserved more than they were given credit for. Drop a comment if you have a theory we didn't cover tonight. The park's mythology has more in it than any single video can hold. Some of the best readings I know came from people who watched a video like this one and then thought of something I'd missed. The park is still open. The door is still unlocked. Come back whenever you need it. Sleep well. Before the true ending, there is one more theory worth spending real time on, because it is the one that sits underneath all the others and holds them up. It is the theory about what Regular Show was doing for its audience, not the characters in it, but the people watching it at midnight in 2012, at 1 a.m. in 2014, on autoplay in 2016 when the finale came out, and everyone watched it in one sitting and then didn't know what to do with themselves after. The show aired on Cartoon Network. It was technically a children's show, but it wasn't watched primarily by children, or it wasn't watched primarily by children in the way Cartoon Network might have originally intended. The show's actual audience, the people who built the fandom, wrote the wikis, made the forum posts, kept the theories alive for years after the show ended, were mostly people in their late teens and 20s and 30s. People who watched the show because Mordecai and Rigby felt real in a way that was difficult to explain. People who were also 23 and broke and unsure what they were doing, and living in circumstances that did not match the shape of the life they had been told they were building toward. The domestic reality of Mordecai and Rigby's life at the park. They earn roughly $100 a month per a throwaway line in a season 4 episode. They cannot afford their own apartments. They live in housing their employer provides. They depend entirely on the goodwill of a manager who threatens to fire them on a near daily basis and technically could, which would leave them homeless. They have no savings. They have no career trajectories. They have each other and a couch and a television and an attic full of things they don't fully understand and a job that is technically menial and actually something much more than that. This is the economic reality of a generation. The show never names that explicitly. It doesn't have speeches about millennial precarity or the failure of the social contract. It just shows you two young people who cannot afford to leave the place they're in, who have structured their entire emotional support system around each other because there isn't much else available, who deal with anxiety and longing and boredom by escalating everything until it has stakes high enough to feel like it matters, and it lets you recognize yourself in it, if you need to. The fan argument is not just that the show depicted this reality. The argument is that the show was kind to its audience about it. It didn't punish Mordecai and Rigby for being stuck. It didn't treat their situation as a moral failure. It gave them a world where their stuckness was understandable and their friendship was real, and the small good days were genuinely worth something. And it took its time getting to the ending, which is that they eventually leave, but they leave when they're ready, not because the world forced them out, but because they grew into people who could make the choice. The conspiratorial version of this is the most generous reading the fandom has. It is that J.G. Quintel and the writers were aware of who was watching and made the show with that audience in mind. That the show was built to be a comfort, not empty. Comfort, the show, is too honest for that, but the real kind, the kind that tells you the truth about your situation while also making it clear that the situation is survivable and that the people in it with you are worth loving. The park, in this reading, is a stand-in for whatever place you're in when you feel between things. The staff are the people you found there. The cosmic threats are what it feels like when ordinary life pressure escalates past your current capacity to handle it. And the ending, the slow, warm, ordinary ending, where everyone gets a reasonable life full of small good things, is the show's parting gift to everyone who watched it in the dark and needed to see that it was possible. There is a thread in the fandom about the show's relationship to the act of watching itself, specifically the sleep-watching phenomenon. Regular Show, along with a handful of other shows of the same era, became a fixture of late-night comfort viewing. People watch it when they can't sleep. People put it on to fall asleep to. The episodes are short. The rhythms are familiar. The universe is surreal enough to feel like a dream, while being grounded enough not to feel like a nightmare. Something about the pacing, the slow build, the long middle, the 10-second gap between the disaster and the resolution corresponds to something in how the brain relaxes into rest. The show treats sleep as a real thing in its mythology. There are dream episodes, episodes where characters cross into shared dreamscapes, where objects carry sleep-adjacent magic, where the boundary between waking and dreaming is part of the plot. The show doesn't treat these as pure fantasy. It treats them with the same casual credulity it treats everything else. Of course, you can access your friend's dreams. Of course, there are beings who live in the sleep space. Of course, what happens in a dream has consequences when you wake up. This is just how things work in a park where the membrane is thin. The fan theory, which is more atmospheric than structural, but not less meaningful for it, is that the show understands itself as a space you enter partly through rest. That the dreamy visual quality, the soft backgrounds, the painterly colors that look slightly like memory rather than actuality, are all part of a conscious aesthetic choice to put the viewer in a specific state of receptivity. The show looks like it's being remembered while it's happening, and memory and near sleep are adjacent states. You are more open in both of them than you are in the middle of your day. The conspiratorial version of this is that the show was designed to reach the viewer in the way only late-night content can, through the gap in the defenses that opens up when you're tired. Not to manipulate, to comfort. To say the things that get filtered out when you're fully awake and functional. Things like, the friendships you make when you're young matter. The ordinary afternoons are worth having. The person you are right now is worth being kind to. Growing up is hard, but the people around you while you do it are not incidental. They are the whole point. The show says all of this, one way or another, across its run. And it says it most clearly at the moments when you're least defended against it, which are the moments just before you fall asleep with the show still playing. That is not an accident. That is the show, knowing exactly what it's for. The revival regular show, The Lost Tapes, which premiered in 2025 on Max, has added a new layer to all of these theories, and it is worth addressing even though most of what follows is provisional. because the revival is still early in its run as this script goes out. The premise of the revival is that Pops, in his afterlife, accidentally damages his memory tape, the VHS labeled regular show that we saw him watching in the original finale's final scene. He takes it to be repaired and discovers a warehouse full of memory tapes, deep within which are hidden tapes of his own, lost adventures, forgotten stories from his time at the park that he hadn't known survived in his memory. The series uses these lost tapes as its framing device, showing new stories set within the original show's timeline. Mark Hamill has confirmed he reprised his role as Skips. William Salyers confirmed he returned as Rigby. Janie Haddad returned as Margaret. The fan theories already circulating about the revival focus mostly on what it means that Pops is the one retrieving these stories. The revival positions him as the viewer, the audience, surrogate in the afterlife, discovering new facets of a life he lived completely but not fully consciously. He was in the stories. Now he gets to watch them. The reading that seems most interesting is that the revival is the show literalizing what it always was, a story told to someone who needed it. The original show was made for an audience in particular states of feeling. The revival is made for that same audience, now older. Some of them, the ones who watched the show in their early 20s, are now in their 30s, maybe their late 30s, and it is told to them through the frame of someone watching their own life with the specific tenderness that comes from having survived it. Pops in the afterlife is the idealized version of what the fandom always was. Someone who loved the park deeply, who was part of it, who got through it, and who now gets to revisit it with the warmth of distance and the knowledge that it ended well. Let's land this properly. Regular Show is a show that knew what it was from the beginning and took its time telling you. It built its house on the premise that two lazy young men couldn't keep a simple job without causing cosmological disasters, and it spent 8 seasons revealing that the house had deeper rooms than the exterior suggested. The mythology was always there. The emotional weight was always there. The care the writers took with their characters was visible from the first season if you looked at the right angles. The theories that have grown up around the show, the park as threshold, the Skips as guardian, the park as hiding place, the anti-Pops as Pops, shadow, the cosmic game structure, the kitchen as heart, are the fandom's way of accounting for the fact that the show kept giving back more than seemed like it should fit. You'd finish an episode about an omelet eating contest and feel something real. You'd watch a background character skip rather than walk and find out 3 seasons later that there was a whole world of grief underneath that habit. The show kept doing that. It kept revealing that the thing you thought was surface was actually quite deep. The wiki is still being updated. New people are finding the show all the time on streaming platforms, on word of mouth, on recommendations from older siblings and university friends who watched it at midnight in years that don't feel that long ago. Each new viewer goes through the same arc, laughing at the absurdity, then getting attached to the characters, then noticing the weight of it, then going back to find where the weight was first put there, and finding, usually, that it was there earlier than they expected. That is the sign of a well-made thing, when the care was in it from the beginning and you just didn't have the angle to see it yet. The park is still open. It will stay open for as long as people keep finding their way to it. Go gently. Rest when you can. The friendships you're building right now, in whatever strange, ordinary place you currently find yourself, they are the actual subject. The cosmic stuff is the frame. The afternoons between are the painting. Good night.